September 23rd, 2009. You wake up and flip on the news in Stockholm and you hear something that sounds like a movie plot someone made up on drugs. A helicopter landed on a building. Men with sledgehammers and explosives broke through the roof. They hoisted bags of cash into the sky. Police watched the whole thing happen. They could not stop it. No bullets fired. No one dead. 39 million kroner vanished into the Swedish morning, and most of it has never been found. This is the story of the only helicopter heist in Swedish history and how a crew of criminals pulled off what sounds impossible until you see the receipts. Blocky, industrial, ugly. Inside that building on this particular Wednesday morning sits roughly 1 billion Swedish kroner, about 150 million US dollars. The unofficial Swedish national payday is 2 days away on Friday the 25th, which means every G4S depot in the country is stuffed with cash for salary deliveries. 21 employees are working the overnight shift. Most of them are on the 6th floor counting bills after pulling them from the vault on the 2nd floor. Poor building design, cash moving vertically through an insecure building. Nobody thought to fix it. That design flaw is about to cost them everything. Oscar Lindgren, the group leader on the 6th floor, hears a rattling he attributes to the idling armored trucks waiting outside for their cash deliveries. Then the sound gets louder. The insulated cash room starts vibrating. Oscar orders his team to stop the counting machines so he can hear better. It is not trucks. 3 men in black jumpsuits, helmets, and masks exit the helicopter. They carry a sledgehammer, buzzsaws, and small explosive charges. Attached to the helicopter skids with zip ties are 2 20-foot aluminum extension ladders. One of the men swings the sledgehammer into the reinforced glass pyramid skylight on the roof. It takes multiple strikes. The glass shatters. The ladder goes down through the hole. The men descend into the building. If you value documented heist history and meticulously researched true crime like this, subscribe. It is the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you are hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from The Atavist, magazine's investigative feature Lifted, published March 2022 by journalist Nadja Drost, who conducted extensive interviews with investigators and accessed police files, and from Faxcology's detailed analysis published January 18, 2023, which cross-references trial documents and forensic reports. These are not tabloid summaries. These are deep investigative sources that reconstruct the operation minute by minute. Now back to the information. They head directly to the cash cages. They place small shaped charges on security doors and interior walls. The charges are a mix of ethylene glycol dinitrate and nitroglycerin, sourced from Polish-made dynamite, custom shaped for precision breaching. The first explosion echoes through the building at 5:17. 2 more follow. Security guards on the 3rd floor hide under a desk. The overnight staff locks themselves in a safe room. Oscar breaks protocol and evacuates his team down the elevator to the 2nd floor vault. The robbers use buzzsaws to cut through the locks on the cash cages. They work fast. They stuff empty sacks with bundled kroner. They haul the sacks back to the ladder. The helicopter, which had lifted off and hovered above the building during the breach, now returns and lands on the roof. The robbers use rope lines to hoist the bags up through the skylight hole into the helicopter. Witnesses from the National Rail Administration office across the street watch the entire sequence. They see men, they see bags going up, they see the helicopter. Chains lined with caltrops, large 3-pronged metal spikes designed to shred tires, have been stretched across all 5 roads leading to the building. Police cars that approach get punctured tires. Officers set up a command post 650 yards away. They call for backup. They call for the National Task Force. They call for helicopters. 25 miles northeast in Middinge on the island of Värmdö, 2 police helicopter pilots wake up in their barracks to a call from headquarters. Robbery in progress, helicopter involved, armed assailants on the roof. The pilots rush 500 yards to the hangar. Pilot Anders Johansson rounds the corner of the building and stops. A shoebox-sized metal box sits outside the personnel door. A red light blinks on top. He yells to his partner. There's a bomb. A second box sits on the tarmac near the helicopters. Both boxes are labeled with the word bomb in large letters. The pilots cannot risk going near the helicopters. If the bombs detonate near the jet fuel, the entire hangar could explode. The police helicopters are grounded. No air pursuit, no aerial response. The robbers had planned for this. At 5:35, with police watching from a distance, the stolen Bell 206 lifts off from the G4S roof with the robbers and the money. It flies southwest. The entire operation inside the depot lasted 20 minutes. The helicopter makes 2 drop-offs. First stop, Draget in the Norsborg suburb. Some of the money and at least 1 robber are offloaded. Second stop, Konumbadet Beach in the Grimsta area. More money and personnel dropped. The helicopter continues north. At 8:15, 3 hours after the heist, the abandoned Bell 206 is found in a field near Skavla in Arninge, 20 kilometers north of Stockholm. The rotor blades have been detached to prevent it from being used again. Inside the helicopter, Forensic teams find fingerprints, DNA traces on zip ties, and a GPS device. 15 bags of cash were left at the base of the ladder, still on the roof. The robbers ran out of time. They could not carry it all. A Bell 206 Jet Ranger has a maximum internal payload of 635 kilograms, about 1,400 pounds. 39 million Swedish kroner in cash weighs more than the helicopter can safely lift in a single load, especially with 3 men and equipment on board. They took what they could and left the rest. The planning for this operation did not start on September 23rd. It started months earlier. The Bell 206 that was stolen that morning came from Roslagen's Flag Center, a commercial helicopter hangar at Mellingeholm Airfield in Norrtälje, 42 miles north of Stockholm. At 4:43 in the morning, military radar picked up the helicopter taking off from Norrtälje. 2 accomplices had cut through a canvas wall to access the hangar and fly the bird away. The helicopter was registered under tail number SE Hahn. The pilot who flew it was a 35-year-old Swedish man named Alexander Eriksson. Eriksson was a licensed helicopter pilot, a marketing manager for a wind power company, and a former TV producer and cameraman. He owned his own helicopter, which he kept at the same Norrtälje base where SE Hahn was stolen. Eriksson had trained on the Bell 206 Jet Ranger. He had borrowed that exact model before. When investigators cross-referenced the database of 552 active helicopter license holders in Sweden with criminal records and proximity to the Norrtälje base, Eriksson's name appeared. His home address was in Lustro, not far from Norrtälje. That proximity was too coincidental to ignore. Rooftops, quick extractions under pressure. Eriksson fit that profile perfectly. He had logged hundreds of hours in helicopters. He knew the airspace around Stockholm. He understood the technical limitations of the Bell 206, its weight capacity, its fuel range, its handling characteristics. More importantly, he had access to the Norrtälje hangar where SE Hahn was stored. He was familiar with the layout. He knew where the helicopters were parked. He knew the security measures, or lack thereof, a canvas wall. That is what protected the hangar. Not steel doors, not electronic locks, canvas. The accomplices cut through it like butter. Over 7,700 units have been manufactured. It is reliable. It is simple to operate. It has been used for everything from news coverage to emergency medical transport to corporate executive shuttles. In Sweden, the Jet Ranger was common enough that seeing one in the sky would not immediately raise suspicion. It was also powerful enough to handle the mission. The turboshaft engine, an Allison 250C-20J on the B3 model, produces 315 kilowatts, about 420 shaft horsepower. That is enough thrust to lift the aircraft. A crew, equipment, and a substantial payload of cash. The rotor diameter is 10.16 meters, about 33 feet 4 inches. The fuselage length is 9.5 meters, roughly 31 feet 2 inches. The cabin can accommodate up to 5 people, including the pilot. For this mission, the rear passenger seats were irrelevant. The space was needed for bags of cash and equipment. The helicopter's maximum cruising speed of 214 kilometers per hour allowed for rapid transit between Norrtälje, Västberga, and the drop points. The range of 732 kilometers meant they could fly the entire operation on a single tank of fuel without needing to refuel mid-mission. That eliminated one potential point of failure. No stopping at fuel stations, no witnesses at refueling locations. Just fly, land, extract, drop, abandon. When were the armored trucks outside waiting for deliveries? They needed to know the roof structure. Was it strong enough to support a helicopter? Where was the skylight? How thick was the reinforced glass? Where were the cash cages inside? How many security guards would be on duty? Where were the security cameras? What were the alarm systems? All of this information required surveillance, drive-bys, observations from nearby buildings, possibly infiltration by someone posing as a contractor or delivery driver. The level of inside knowledge the robbers demonstrated on September 23rd strongly suggests that someone with access to the depot's internal layout provided information, or that extensive photographic and video reconnaissance was conducted from external vantage points. The building was 6 stories tall, blocky, industrial, functional. It was designed to process and store cash, not to withstand a military-style assault from the air. The flat roof was not fortified. There were no anti-helicopter measures, no nets, no obstacles, no sensors. The skylight was reinforced glass, but reinforced glass is still glass. Hit it hard enough with a sledgehammer and it will break. The robbers understood this. They tested their equipment. They knew how many strikes it would take. They knew how long the ladder needed to be. They knew how much explosive force was required to blow open interior security doors without bringing down the entire structure. This level of precision comes from testing, from trial runs, from rehearsals. Somewhere, at some location unknown to investigators, the crew practiced the entry. They built mock-ups. They timed themselves. They refined the sequence. By the time they landed on the G4S roof at 5:15, they were executing a plan they had run through multiple times. You need to calculate the amount of explosive material needed to breach a door without causing excessive collateral damage. Mikael Södergran, the explosives expert in the crew, had that knowledge. His DNA was found on detonator wires inside the depot. He handled the charges. He placed them. He set the timers or triggers. The explosives were sourced from Polish-made dynamite, a detail that suggests an international supply chain. Dynamite is not something you can buy at a hardware store in Sweden. It is regulated. It is tracked. Obtaining it requires connections, possibly to construction companies, mining operations, or black market arms dealers. The fact that the robbers had access to high-quality explosive material indicates a level of sophistication and criminal networking beyond typical street-level crime. The psychological warfare component of the operation was deliberate. The robbers carried AK-47 assault rifles. They displayed them in front of CCTV cameras. Safa Kadum admitted in his testimony that he was instructed to carry an unloaded rifle and flaunt it to intimidate security and police. The goal was not to shoot anyone. The goal was to make law enforcement believe that any attempt to storm the building would result in a firefight. This kept the police at a distance. It delayed their entry. It gave the robbers the time they needed to complete the heist. The explosions inside the depot amplified the fear. Security guards hiding under desks. Staff locking themselves in safe rooms. Everyone inside thought the building might collapse. The robbers created chaos and used that chaos as cover. The longer people were paralyzed by fear, the more time the robbers had to work. The diversionary tactics on the ground were equally sophisticated. Caltrops are medieval weapons. They have been used for centuries to disable cavalry horses and, later, vehicles. Each caltrop is a metal device with 3 or 4 spikes arranged so that one spike always points upward no matter how it lands. Drive over one and your tire is punctured. Over 200 caltrops were scattered across 5 different roads leading to the depot. That is not a spur-of-the-moment decision. That is planned. Someone had to manufacture or acquire 200 caltrops. Someone had to scout the roads and determine the optimal placement points. Someone had to lay them out in the hours before the heist without being noticed. The coordination required for this is staggering. Multiple teams, multiple locations, all operating on a strict timeline, and it worked. Police cars arriving at the scene got their tires shredded. Response was delayed. Officers had to approach on foot or set up their command post hundreds of yards away. Police pilots arriving at the hangar in the middle of the night, adrenaline pumping, looking at 2 suspicious boxes with red lights, are not going to take chances. They are not going to assume it is a hoax. They are going to call the bomb squad. They are going to evacuate. They are going to ground the helicopters. By the time the bomb squad arrived at Middinge and determined the boxes were fakes, it was 1 in the afternoon. The helicopter heist was over hours earlier. The robbers were long gone. The decoy bombs achieved their objective without a single gram of actual explosive material. That is psychological manipulation at its finest. This reduces the weight on the helicopter, making it easier to fly and handle. It also disperses the crew, making it harder for police to track everyone at once. Second drop, in Grimsta, more crew and more money offloaded. Each drop point likely had vehicles waiting. Cars that were registered to people with no obvious connection to the crew. Stolen plates, rentals, borrowed vehicles. The crew members who were dropped off grabbed the bags of cash, got into the cars, and drove away. Different directions, different routes. Some may have headed north, some south, some east, some west. Scatter and disappear. The helicopter then flew to Arning and was abandoned in a field. The pilot and any remaining crew members had another vehicle waiting there. They detached the rotor blades to make sure the helicopter could not be immediately used by police or anyone else. They wiped down surfaces. Though they missed some DNA evidence, they left the GPS device behind, perhaps intentionally to mislead investigators, or perhaps in haste. Then they vanished into the woods. This was Sweden's first helicopter heist, and it remains the only one in Swedish history. The novelty of the method, combined with the audacity of the execution, made it global news. Within hours, CNN, BBC, and Associated Press were running stories. The term helicopter heist became shorthand for daring, cinematic crime. The story had everything: aviation, explosives, decoy bombs, 1 billion kroner in a depot, robbers rappelling through a skylight, police unable to respond because their helicopters were grounded. It sounded like a movie script. Journalists descended on Stockholm. Camera crews filmed the depot. Reporters interviewed witnesses. The National Rail Administration employees who watched the heist from their office windows became key sources. They described seeing the helicopter land, seeing men jump out, seeing bags being hoisted up. The footage captured by G-Forest security cameras inside the depot was leaked to media. Viewers saw masked men in black moving through corridors. They saw explosions. They saw cash cages being sawed open. The images were stunning. The Swedish public was riveted. Everyone was talking about it. How did they do it? How did they plan it? Who are they? Will they be caught? Will the money be recovered? The mastermind behind the heist was a 39-year-old Swedish man of Montenegrin descent named Goran Bojovic. Bojovic had connections to Stockholm's criminal underworld and ties to the former BIA Red Berets, Serbia's secret police. 1 month before the robbery, Serbian police intercepted communications about the recruitment of a helicopter pilot for a heist planned in Stockholm. They informed the Swedish embassy in Belgrade. Swedish authorities failed to act effectively. The National Task Force had been conducting surveillance, but at the wrong depot, a G4S facility in Bromma in the northwest of the city, not Västberga in the south. That address belonged to Alexander Ericsson's wife. The bearded man met with Goran Bojovic. They shook hands and spoke for several minutes. On September 9th, 1 week after that meeting, wiretaps picked up Bojovic saying, "We can stop looking." 2 weeks later, on September 23rd, the helicopter was stolen and the heist was executed. Each person had a specific role. The pilot, Alexander Ericsson. The 3 men who entered the building, including 31-year-old Safa Kadum, an Iraqi-born Swede who had previously served 2 years in prison for stealing 1 Rembrandt and 2 Renoir paintings from the Swedish National Museum. The explosives expert, Mikael Södergran. The logistics coordinator, Goran Bojovic. The man suspected of placing the decoy bombs at the police helicopter base, Nemanja Alish, a gangster film fan who worked at a newsstand. At least 4 other men were responsible for laying the caltrops on the roads. 2 more coordinated the post-heist rendezvous points. Confirmed their position using a prepaid phone. Over the next 90 minutes, various prepaid phones called Bojovic to confirm positions. 4 phones checked in ready with caltrops and chains. 2 phones confirmed they were at the rendezvous points. At around 4:30, Nemanja ran to the police hangar with the metal boxes and placed one at the entrance and another on the tarmac. He removed his gloves, placed them in tall grass several yards away, and lit them on fire to destroy evidence. 5 minutes later, Alexander Ericsson stole the helicopter and flew toward Bojovic's position. The men attached the ladders to the helicopter skids with zip ties and loaded their equipment. But they looked real enough to ground the police helicopters. The caltrops on the roads were real. Over 200 spiked devices were recovered by police across multiple routes. The fake bombs were constructed from metal pipes, fireworks, and blinking red lights. The planning included testing the explosives beforehand. The shaped charges used inside the depot had been tested at an unknown location to ensure they would breach reinforced doors, without causing excessive collateral damage or alerting authorities too early. Mikael Södergran's DNA was found on detonator wires inside the depot. The glove fragments that Nemanja Alic tried to burn at Midinga yielded partial DNA. Fingerprints from the decoy bombs matched known associates. In mid-January 2010, after a tip from the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, 10 masked Dominican police officers rushed Kadum and a fellow Swede as they went to dinner in a small resort town near the border with Haiti. Swedish police immediately chartered a private plane and brought him back to Stockholm. Alexander Ericsson, meanwhile, booked a flight to the Canary Islands. He was stopped at Stockholm's International Airport by a Swedish Special Operations Unit before he could board. He claimed innocence. He said he had an alibi. He told interrogators he had a drug relapse the night of September 23rd and was too incapacitated to fly a helicopter. But the surveillance footage from Skeppsholmen, the meeting with Bojovic, the fact that his helicopter was stored at the same base where S.E. Hahn was stolen, and the DNA evidence inside the stolen helicopter made his story collapse. Goran Bojovic was arrested in his apartment. Police found 118,000 kroner in cash and seized a new BMW he had been driving around town. The trial could not be held in a regular courthouse because investigators feared the robbers' associates might land another helicopter on the flat roof and attempt a rescue or attack. 7 men were convicted. 3 were acquitted. Alexander Ericsson was sentenced to 8 years in prison for aggravated robbery. He pleaded not guilty. He maintained his innocence even after conviction. Safa Kadum, who confessed his involvement, received 8 years. In his testimony, Kadum claimed he was forced into the robbery because he owed money to the mastermind, whose name he refused to reveal. He said the interest on his debt was piling up, and the lender offered him a way to clear it by participating in the heist. He was instructed to carry an unloaded rifle and display it in front of CCTV cameras to intimidate security and deter police from entering the building. Goran Bojovic received 3 to 4 years for planning the robbery. Prosecutors could not definitively place him inside the helicopter, so his sentence was lighter. He also received an additional 4 years for an unrelated arson. Mikael Södergran, the explosives expert, received a prison term. The men who laid the caltrops received sentences ranging from 1 to 5 years. Nemanja Alic, accused of planting the fake bombs at Midinga, was acquitted. His defense argued that the DNA evidence could be explained by him loaning his gloves to someone else and handling lighters at his newsstand job. A gait expert testified that an ankle injury would have prevented Alice from running like the man captured on Midinga surveillance tapes. Of the 39 million Swedish kroner taken, less than 100,000 kroner has been found. That is less than half of 1%. The rest vanished. Investigators believe at least 20 people were involved in the heist, which means more than half the crew was never caught. The money was likely laundered through multiple channels, moved across borders, converted into other assets. Boyovich had connections in the Balkans. Some investigators suspected involvement from former members of the BIA Red Berets, the elite Serbian Special Forces unit. Serbian Interior Minister Ivica Dačić publicly claimed that former Red Berets participated in the robbery, though he provided no concrete evidence. Over 300 tips from the public poured in. None led to the bulk of the stolen cash. The investigation became the highest priority for Swedish law enforcement. Dozens of officers from the National Organized Crime Police Division, the RKP, were assigned full-time to the case. Wiretaps, surveillance, DNA analysis, IT forensics, international cooperation with US DEA and Serbian authorities. Everything. The case file grew massive. But the money stayed gone. Swedish public television broadcaster Sveriges Television released a 6-part Swedish-language documentary called Helicopter Rånet in 2017. Author Jonas Bonnier interviewed 4 of the jailed perpetrators and published a semi-fictional novel also titled Helicopter Rånet in 2017. Netflix adapted Bonnier's book into an 8-part miniseries called The Helicopter Heist, which premiered in 2024. The robbery even influenced video game design. Grand Theft Auto V, released in 2013 by Rockstar Games, includes a heist mission called the Bureau Raid, in which players land a helicopter on a secure building and rappel through a skylight, a scenario loosely based on the Västberga events. Empty weight, about 1,455 pounds. That leaves a payload capacity of roughly 1,500 pounds for fuel, crew, equipment, and cargo. With 3 men on board, each weighing around 180 pounds on average, plus fuel, plus the weight of ladders and tools, the helicopter's lifting capacity was already constrained. 39 million Swedish kroner in cash, depending on the denomination of the bills, weighs several hundred kilograms. The robbers could not take it all in one trip. They filled as many bags as they could hoist and lift, then fled. 15 bags were left behind. Those bags likely contained millions more, but there was no time and no capacity to retrieve them. The helicopter's range with full fuel and no reserves was about 732 kilometers, roughly 385 nautical miles. Plenty of range to fly from Norrtälje to Västberga to the drop points to Arninge and still have fuel remaining. Cruise speed was around 214 kilometers per hour. That is about 115 knots. Fast enough to evade ground pursuit, but not fast enough to outrun a police helicopter if one had been airborne. The decoy bombs ensured no police choppers got off the ground. Assault with explosives. The depot had no rooftop sensors, no helicopter tracking, no fail-safe procedures for aerial intrusion. After the robbery, the Swedish parliament passed a law designating cash depots as protected facilities. Some G4S guards were allowed to carry weapons. Security protocols were revised. But the damage was done. The heist exposed vulnerabilities in how Sweden protected high-value cash storage sites. The timing was perfect. September 23rd, 2 days before the unofficial national payday, the depot was at peak cash storage, 1 billion kroner, $150 million. The robbers knew this. They had inside knowledge or had conducted extensive surveillance to determine the optimal moment. The early morning timing, 5:15, meant fewer witnesses and delayed detection. Most of the city was asleep. The first police arrived at 5:25. But by then the robbers were inside, the explosives had been detonated, and the money was being hoisted into the helicopter. The diversionary tactics, the caltrops, the fake bombs, bought the robbers the critical minutes they needed. By 5:35, they were airborne. By 8:15, the helicopter was abandoned and the crew had dispersed. The drop points in Norsborg and Grimstad allowed the robbers to split up and disappear into the suburbs. Multiple getaway vehicles were waiting. The operation was designed with redundancy and contingency. If one escape route was blocked, there were others. Security guards hid. Staff locked themselves in safe rooms. Oskar Lindgren made the decision to evacuate his team from the 6th floor, breaking protocol, because he believed staying put was more dangerous than moving. None of the staff were physically harmed, but the trauma of being inside a building under assault, with men wielding weapons and detonating explosives, left scars. The robbers reportedly carried AK-47s and other automatic weapons, though no shots were fired. The weapons were for intimidation and to keep security personnel and police at bay. The strategy worked. No armed confrontation occurred. The pilots were informed and offered to assist in tracking the stolen helicopter. The offer was declined because the robbery was classified as a civilian matter, not a military one. Swedish law at the time did not permit military intervention in domestic criminal incidents unless specifically requested by civilian authorities. The decision not to use the Gripen jets meant the stolen helicopter was tracked only by ground units and radar, not by high-speed aircraft that could have followed it easily. One lead investigator suggested that the building's plans could have been circulating since 2006, waiting for the right crew to exploit them. The robbers knew where to go inside the depot. They went directly to the cash cages. No wrong turns, no hesitation. That level of precision requires either inside information or extensive reconnaissance. Surveillance footage from the depot showed the robbers moved with confidence and speed. They had practiced, they had planned, they had rehearsed. Eriksson received 8 years total. Kadam received 8 years total. Goran Bojović's sentence remained intact. Eriksson's lawyer, Leif Silbersky, suggested that new evidence of innocence would be presented, but it never materialized. One local tabloid reported that Eriksson's family planned to hire private detectives to track down the real helicopter pilot, but no such investigation ever produced results. Eriksson continued to maintain his innocence even after his final appeal was rejected. In October 2013, Eriksson gave an interview on the Swedish talk show Efter Tio, hosted by Malou von Sivers, a former colleague from his TV production days. He discussed the challenges he faced during the robbery and how he navigated them, though he still claimed he was not the pilot. He also gave multiple interviews to author Jonas Barnier for the book. Facilities. The Västberga heist became a case study in criminology and security engineering courses. It demonstrated how criminals could exploit multiple domains, air and ground, to carry out high-value thefts. It also demonstrated that even well-executed crimes tend to leave sufficient evidence for capture. The DNA traces, the surveillance footage, the wiretaps, the phone records, all of it combined to identify and convict the core members of the crew. But the failure to recover the money and the fact that more than half the crew was never identified left investigators frustrated. From a licensed pilot and marketing professional to a convicted felon serving 8 years for aggravated robbery. Safa Kadam, who had already served time for the National Museum art theft, found himself back in prison. Goran Bojović, the mastermind, spent years in custody. The others who were convicted served their sentences and were eventually released. As of 2025, most of the convicted robbers have completed their prison terms and are presumably living as free men, though their criminal records remain. None have publicly disclosed where the money went. None have returned it. The silence on the location of the stolen cash is absolute. But the security measures have been upgraded. The heist left a permanent mark on the company and on Stockholm. The story is told in bars and living rooms across Sweden. The helicopter heist, the one where they flew in, smashed through the roof and got away. The one where police could not stop them because fake bombs grounded their helicopters and spikes shredded their tires. The one where 39 million kroner disappeared and has never been found. The mastermind and his network exploited weaknesses in security, timing, and coordination. They used aviation, explosives, and diversionary tactics to execute a heist that stunned law enforcement and captured global attention. The failure was not in the execution. The failure was in the aftermath. The robbers could not stay hidden. They could not resist the lure of spending or flaunting their new wealth. Bojović's new BMW. Kadam's trip to the Dominican Republic. Eriksson's flight to the Canary Islands. These were the mistakes that led to arrests. If they had stayed quiet, stayed low, stayed disciplined, some of them might never have been caught. In 2012, police excavating a field near one of the drop points in Norsborg found a buried cache. Not cash, equipment, ladders, cutting tools, burn marks on fabric, residue from explosive compounds, all of it buried in a shallow pit and covered with soil and brush. The GPS coordinates of the cache matched data retrieved from the GPS device found in the abandoned helicopter. The cache proved the drop points were planned in advance. The robbers had pre-positioned backup equipment and escape materials at multiple locations. They had contingency plans within contingency plans. The level of preparation was extraordinary, and the money, the 39 million kroner that vanished, remains the ghost. It is out there, converted, laundered, hidden, spent. The investigators know it is gone. The robbers know it is gone. But no one is talking. And that silence, 15 years later, is louder than any confession.